Hi, I'm Dr. Kathleeen Montgomery, here with an AverPoint coronavirus update. Convalescent plasma made the news last week after the announcement that the FDA would grant an EUA, or Emergency Use Authorization, for its use in COVID-19. Now, before we get into the science of antibodies, let's briefly touch on what an EUA is. For a treatment to be fully FDA approved, it needs to have been proven both safe and effective in randomized controlled trials. But an EUA is a way for a new treatment to be used during extenuating circumstances like a pandemic. For a treatment to have an EUA, it only needs to be reasonable to believe it may be effective. That's where we are right now with convalescent plasma. It's promising, but not yet proven. First, what is convalescent plasma? Well, convalescent refers to anyone recovering or recently recovered from a disease. Plasma is the yellow liquid part of the blood that remains after you remove all the white and red blood cells. It contains things like water, electrolytes, clotting factors, and yes, antibodies. Giving antibody-rich plasma to hospitalized COVID patients may help them recover quicker. Giving a patient someone else's antibodies is a form of passive immunity. The idea is to provide something from outside the body to help a person's immune system fight the virus until their own immune system can take over and produce its own antibodies, part of what scientists call active immunity. Now, not all antibodies are created equal. They differ from person to person in both quality and quantity. Antibodies are small proteins made by certain types of white blood cells that recognize molecules on the surfaces of viruses. Some of them just bind to the virus and tag it so your immune system knows to remove the virus. These are called binding or non-neutralizing antibodies. Others bind to the virus and decrease its ability to infect your cells. These are called neutralizing antibodies. Both are helpful, but neutralizing antibodies may pack a harder punch against COVID-19. Unfortunately, not everyone infected with SARS-CoV-2 ends up making neutralizing antibodies. Presumably, plasma from patients who do could be more effective at treating the disease, but more research is still needed. People also make different quantities of antibodies. We make the most in the first few weeks after infection, when large quantities of antibody are needed to fight off the virus. After that, antibody levels wane, sometimes to undetectable levels, and only a few memory cells remain, ready to be called into action in the future. In COVID, antibody levels have been shown to decline rapidly, reaching half their peak levels in only 36 days. This means that plasma from recently recovered patients will contain more antibodies than plasma from patients who recovered months previously. Okay, so now we know what it is, but how well does it work? What data do we have so far? Most of the data we have so far comes from the preliminary results of a large study from the Mayo Clinic. It's not a randomized controlled trial because all of the 35,000 patients in the study received convalescent plasma, but it is a large study that tells us a lot of interesting things. As we discussed earlier, not all plasma is the same. The study compared people who got plasma with low, medium, and high antibody levels and found that those with the highest antibody levels received more benefit. Those who received high antibody plasma had a 35% decrease in their relative risk of death in 7 days, and a 22% decrease in their risk of death in 30 days compared to people who received low antibody plasma. They also found that plasma helped more if it was given earlier in disease, which makes sense. Early in the course of the disease, your body isn't making antibodies yet. That's when you need the antibodies of other people. After about a week or so, your body starts making its own antibodies, and more of the harm from the disease is coming from an overactive immune response. There has been one randomized controlled trial on plasma out of China on about 100 patients, and it appeared at first glance to find no significant effects of plasma. However, when other researchers reviewed the same data, they noticed that hospitalized patients in severe rather than critical condition actually did get a benefit from plasma. This means that plasma may be better suited to patients who are in the earlier stages of disease or who don't yet have life-threatening complications. So now that we've gone over what convalescent plasma is and some of the data on its effectiveness, what about its safety? Is it a safe treatment? The short answer is most of the time. We use plasma already in many situations in the hospital, like after a trauma, in autoimmune diseases, and in patients whose blood does not clot effectively. Any blood product carries a small risk of a side effect called a transfusion reaction. A preliminary report from Mayo on the first 20,000 patients to receive convalescent plasma found that less than 1% of them had serious side effects, but they included blood clots, cardiac events, allergic reactions, lung injury, or overload of the circulatory system, so sometimes they were severe. One other possible issue is that the antibodies are foreign to your body, so your body may make antibodies to the antibodies you receive, making them less effective. That's another possible complication of the treatment. Having to rely on plasma donors for antibodies has some limitations. But what if we could make the most potent type of neutralizing antibody and give it to patients? Several drugs doctors are already using to treat cancer and other diseases are manufactured antibodies. We insert a gene into a cell to teach it to produce the antibody we need. We can do this in COVID too, and several companies are in the process of creating and testing such a product. These are called monoclonal antibodies. We can even mix together several types of antibodies to make a more potent cocktail, which would be called a polyclonal antibody. There are many advantages to lab-created antibodies, including that we can standardize the concentration of the antibodies and the types of antibodies that are present. We don't have to worry about other potentially harmful substances in patient plasma. It decreases the risk of transfusion reactions. We won't need a constant stream of plasma donors. The product may be more shelf-stable, and we can easily scale up the amount of product we need for the demand without relying on more donors. This is a really promising idea, and research is underway. Hopefully this coronavirus update helped you understand a little bit more about using antibodies in the treatment of COVID-19. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, please share it and interact with more evidence at averpoint.com. Thanks.